Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to today's virtual session with Turnstile Tours. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, thanks so much for coming back and for supporting us. So today we have a really special guest who's going to be joining us. We have Adam Friedman, who is the director of the Pratt Center for Community Development, and we're going to be talking all about manufacturing. So we're going to bring Adam on in just a minute. Just wanted to mention a couple of things before we dive into today's conversation. We have actually a number of topics coming up related to manufacturing, including tomorrow. We're going to be in the morning, since the first Sunday of the month is usually our World War II history tour at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We're going to be doing a program all about wartime manufacturing, a topic that's been in the news a lot lately. We're gonna look back at the 1940s and how that impacted Brooklyn and the Navy Yard area specifically. And then in the afternoon, we're going to talk to a local manufacturer. We're going to be interviewing Rhonda Cave, who runs Ronnie Sue's Chocolate in the Lower East Side. And she's going to be doing a chocolate making workshop for us virtually. So that'll be really fun. Then on Monday, we're not talking about manufacturing. We are instead going to have on Nick Golbievsky, who is an artist also based in the Navy Yard, who is going to be doing some drawing workshops with us. So that is going to be super fun. So he's going to teach you how to do quick draw of things around your apartment or what you can see out the window, and then we're going to share it online. So those are some of the things we have coming up. And then on the 8th, we're going to be talking to Michelle Green, who has a metal art studio in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We're going to be doing a program following up on our history of New York City public markets. We're going to be doing a part 2. So we have a lot of really exciting stuff coming up. So you can go to our website, turnstyletours.com, and see everything. You can also sign up for our All Access Pass, so that gives you access to all the future events, as well as watching recordings of past events. So check it out. We're literally adding new programs every day. So we try and stay about a week to 10 days ahead of things so you can see what's coming up. A couple things to note about how today's conversation is going to work, like all the others. If you have any questions for Adam or myself, you can go down into the chat. So you see down at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat option. There are two options for the chat. You can either type in select all panelists, which will go to me and Adam, as well as Amanda, who's our producer behind the scenes. She's going to be answering a lot of the questions in the chat. And then we also have Cindy, who's on board today doing the closed captioning. But you can select all panelists, so it'll just go to us, or you can select all panelists and attendees, and so everybody in the chat will see it. So while we're talking about the chat, if you want to tell us who you are, where you're joining us from, and folks who are joining us on Facebook Live, thanks so much. You can also type any questions that you have in there, and we'll try and get to them. But I think this is going to be a pretty wide-ranging conversation because it's a really, really big topic. And then last housekeeping thing, if you want to turn on the closed captioning, you can do that. So there's a button for the closed captioning. And so Cindy, like I said, is helping us out with that today. The title of today's session is Manufacturing in Crisis. So we're going to be talking about the state of New York City manufacturing. Yes, we still have manufacturing in New York City, and it's actually a really, really important part of our economy, and especially important for the type and quality of jobs it provides for such a wide range of New Yorkers. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how New York City manufacturers have survived basically a period of 30 plus years of crisis, but also how they're adapting to the immediate crisis that we're dealing with today. You've probably seen a lot of news stories, and we've talked about it on this program, about the ways different companies, including those at the Army Terminal and the Brooklyn Navy Yard, are shifting over their production to produce critical medical supplies. There's been a lot of talk about the National Defense Production Act and how the country is going to get that personal protective equipment, as well as all the ventilators that we need to deal with this public health emergency. So we're going to talk about that big picture, but we're also going to zoom in and talk about what's happening in New York and really demystify manufacturing, because I think it's not on a lot of people's radar. Especially when you think about the jobs and the work that people do here in New York City. So a little bit of background about Adam. I'm going to bring him on in just a second. So he's the director of the Pratt Center for Community Development. Prior to coming to Pratt, he founded something called the New York Industrial Retention Network. So he is a long time expert in the field of New York City manufacturing. I don't think there's a better person we could talk to on this subject. So I'm going to bring in Adam here. So just bear with me for 1 second.
Hi there.
Hey, Adam.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I am well.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in East Hampton, in the Springs.
Nice.
Which is absolutely beautiful out here.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So I think I know you have a great presentation for us, but is there anything you want us to know before we dive right in?
Yeah, two things. First of all, that was a great framing of the issues that we're going to go through. What's the crisis we've been in for 30 odd years, plus how has it changed today? So I'm going to start off with that a little bit of that history, but also this is, to be honest, the first large-scale remote presentation that I've done. And I'm happy to be here. I'm also really intrigued to see how it unfolds. A big piece of our work is building community, whether it's by a sector or whether it's by a neighborhood or whether it's by the city or beyond the city. How do we preserve a sense of community and solidarity together? And this is now one of the strategies, probably the primary strategy at this point, how we're trying to rise to that challenge. So I'm really curious to see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, the work that you've done, you've heard a little bit about the crisis that the industrial sector, the manufacturing has faced for 30 years. Turnstile Tours has done a great job of trying to help people to appreciate how important manufacturing still is to the vitality, the vibrancy of the city.
Well, thank you. We try our best. Adam, I want to mention, since you don't have an audience, I thought we should introduce some of the people who are tuning in. So I see here we have Brian, who said he's worked for 29 years in electronics manufacturing out in Silicon Valley. We have Katie from Washington Heights, Debbie from Newton, Massachusetts. So we got people coming in from all over. So again, folks out there watching, drop your questions in as we go along. But Adam, I'm going to turn on your presentation. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's great.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. Just the heading for a moment, manufacturing a just and equitable city. That is part of our mission of the Pratt Center, and I'll talk about that in a second, but we see a healthy, vibrant manufacturing sector as being essential to a just and equitable city, largely because of the jobs, and we'll zoom in a little bit about that. So let's go to the next
Well,
slide.
I just wanted to mention one thing real quick, Adam, is who is these folks that we're looking at on this slide?
They're a bunch of guys in the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Yeah. So this is Scott Jordan Furniture, which is I just want to mention them because they've been such a great partner and such a great little company that's been in the Navy Yard now for over 30 years.
And does absolutely beautiful work. And one of the things we're going to talk about later is the manufacturing that survived here, how it's really part of the creative economy, how these guys are in between artists and other components of what we think of as being the innovation sector. They're artisans. They're just like this incredible piece of the sort of the cluster of activities that make up the creative economy in the city of New York. So let's go on. So a very brief history of the Pratt Center. Then we're going to spend most of our time looking at manufacturing today in New York City. And then we're going to turn to including Made in NYC, which is the initiative that is run by the Pratt Center. And then we'll turn to how the sector is impacted by and responding to COVID-19. So this is our mission, seeking to build a more just and equitable city and sustainable city for all New Yorkers. We have three buckets of work. One is in energy efficiency and promoting a more sustainable operation of the city. Second has to do with land use. And the third, which we're going to do the deep dive on now, is manufacturing. Let's go to the next. Thank you. So we've been around for 60 odd years almost. And the center was launched by Pratt Institute School of Architecture and Urban Planning at a point in time when New York City was just burning. You know, there was rioting all over Brooklyn, and the faculty and the students in the department wanted to provide assistance to the community groups that were trying to rebuild. And this is the start of the community development movement. Working with our immediate neighbors in Bed-Stuy, they brought together a number of the faith-based community and the business community and residential community, and that formed the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, which became the model for the legislation introduced by Senator Robert Kennedy that really spawned the community development movement in the United States. And the key takeaway from that is a certain approach. It's an approach to problem solving that is driven by communities. We provide the tools, we help them access the decision makers, though I have to tell you, they really need a whole lot of help these days, though that may change with C19. But they are the decision makers, they are our clients, they are our partners, and we don't get out ahead, we support their efforts. That's kind of I would say, the essence of community development. Let's go to the next. So why do we do this? Andrew's talked a little bit about the importance of industrial jobs in the city. The chart on the right gives you some idea of how manufacturing jobs compare in terms of wages with other key sectors. You know, well, the average production wage in the city of New York is well over $50,000. You know, contrast that with retailing, which is around $30,000. Let's go to the next. So it's not only overall job quality, but job quality for whom? You know, and this gives you some idea of how those sectors contrast for people who only have a high school degree and haven't gone on to college. Just at that level of education, you can see the very significant earnings potential in manufacturing in contrast to the entertainment and hospitality industry, and in contrast to retailing. Let's go on. So much for the good news. You know, the challenge here is being in the city of New York, or being in any dense, strong market urban area. Gentrification, land is expensive and land is very unstable in New York. There's always the potential for it to be flipped. There's always the potential, an owner believes, and a property owner often believes, there's always the potential to do something that will return more on their investment rather than return more to the community. So gentrification is a major issue. Second, just conflicting uses. You know, the city is dense, right? And everything is going on in a relatively small area. That's the definition of a city almost. And often those uses conflict. So here's an illustration. We want to support bikers for environmental reasons. They often conflict with the truck routes. And the final issue here is, given that growing population density, the need for housing. Let's go to the next slide. So this map shows you where in the city of New York industrial areas have been targeted for rezoning to promote manufacturing. And it's a tremendous swath of the remaining manufacturing areas in the city. Let's go to the next. So, but here's the conundrum, you know, here's the piece that people don't often recognize, is that no housing is affordable without a job. So you have to set a balance. And what this chart shows you is the contrast between two families, one dependent on an income from retailing and one dependent on income from a manufacturing job. And the green is the amount of subsidy the city would have to provide to make those housing units affordable. And you can see how much greater the subsidy would have to be for a family deriving its income from retailing as opposed to manufacturing. So striking the right balance is critical, not only for the functionality of the city, but for affordable housing.
I mean, this also shows, I just want to mention that even with a good paying job, you still need help to afford housing in New York City.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And this may be a little dated already, but it's just an extraordinarily expensive place. A lot of that is driven by land cost. So how is it possible for urban manufacturing to survive and to thrive in a city like New York, or really like San Francisco, like LA, like Boston, any strong market city? And what strategy companies have to employ is to pursue a high value added production and high value added marketing. So urban manufacturing of the past, you have this contrast or a number of examples on the left-hand side of your screen. New York City, Swingline Staplers was in Long Island City in New York. Farberware Pots and Pans was in the Bronx. There were tons and tons of relatively low-end apparel companies throughout the city. Those are all commodity products. And what I mean by that is there's no particular reason for them to be in New York. They could be made virtually anywhere. There's not a whole lot of design element. There's not a whole lot of craft. Proximity to market really doesn't make a difference, And so over time, all that manufacturing, those very large scale manufacturers left. What remains here today are the high value added products, very high end apparel and fashion, very high end woodworking and metalworking, and of course, niches in the food industry. You can think of New York because of the diversity of our city and the fact that we have people from, I believe, 150 other nations as being this great, big, incredible test kitchen. Each immigrant community nurtures its own products and its own manufacturing. And over time, those products can cross over into the mainstream market. And so that's a great source of new product development. It's like New York is a great big test kitchen.
And I just to that point, because food is such a big part of manufacturing in New York, I think a lot of people probably think about that as mostly sort of like gourmet specialty foods, but a lot of them are just foods that are produced for the community that's here, and then, like you said, they cross over. So it's a really broad spectrum in that sector too. So that's a great point.
Right, and it gives New York part of that attraction as being the sophisticated, international, cosmopolitan, on the edge city. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the broad perspective on what's left of manufacturing in New York. And just to, like I said, what's left. So in the 1960s, there were about 1 million manufacturing jobs. There are now about 80,000 manufacturing jobs. And so that's a dramatic decline, but 80,000 is not to be sneezed at. There's close to 6,000 manufacturing firms. And because that sector is in New York, it's kind of dwarfed by larger sectors, right? In finance or in entertainment or in education. But to put this in perspective, there are more people in manufacturing in New York City than exist in many other cities in the United States. It's still a big chunk of the economy, and it's an export activity. That means that it brings wealth into the city, and it has a big ripple effect in our local economy. So every 100 jobs in manufacturing translates into, I think, 66 jobs in other sectors. It has a ripple impact.
And while we're on that subject, Adam, could you just define manufacturing for us? Like what?
It's really hard. What I think the essence of it has to do with a transformation to a physical good, a physical product, and adding value in some way to that. There's actually a lot of dispute about that, there are some folks who think, well, what about software production? What about, app production? And I think I push back about that because of the need for a real solid physical good. It's not just, chips. It's not just, electric impulses. It has to be something that requires transportation. It's something I've heard it said, it has to be something you can drop.
Huh. Now, what about like movies and television?
Yes, no, I have no hesitation with that. And that's actually a very large and growing segment of the manufacturing sector, like Steiner Studios or Broadway studios, Broadway stages rather. And the reason for that, if you think how it's actually made, it's carpenters, it's sewers, it's a lot of people doing very physical things. And yes, they're conveyed or they're communicated in a different manner, but the actual production requires this physical transformation.
Hmm. Okay.
So turn to Made in NYC. So we run Made in NYC, which is a local branding program. And what do I mean by that? What we're trying to do is take some of the value that is attached to New York City overall and capitalize on that and use it to boost the manufacturers. And this program was launched after 9/11, and it's interesting the parallels between then and today. And after 9/11, New York City was absolutely shut down. Trucking couldn't move in and out of the city in general. The industrial areas were particularly shut down. The fashion industry, the garment industry was concentrated at that time in Chinatown. There were over 400 factories in Chinatown. And the sort of the dead zone or the lockdown zone was on Canal Street, cutting that industry in half. And so Made in NYC was launched as a way to get New Yorkers, both consumers and other manufacturers, to purchase from each other, to purchase locally to stimulate that sector. And at that point in time, I think we started with maybe 200 companies, 250 companies. Today we have well over 1,300. So it's grown very, very dramatically as a piece of the whole locavore movement, and because we see it as more environmentally sustainable, pushing production locally, producing locally. Let's go to the next. So this gives you some idea of what production looks like in New York City today. It's still overwhelmingly fashion and jewelry, still food and beverage, and home and interiors. And what we mean by that is woodworking, architectural woodworking, metalworking. A lot of it is going into construction in New York City. And when you think about it, all those sectors, even food and beverage, are high value added. They're kind of a designer sectors because they require such a high design element in the creation and the production of the product. And this gives you the chart on the right gives you some idea of how it's located. There is still a tremendous amount of production in Manhattan. It's sort of invisible, as we were saying earlier about how the sector is dwarfed by other sectors, but this is particularly heavily concentrated in the fashion industry and a very large segment in Brooklyn.
And two things I just wanted to clarify about this. So number one, this is a reflection of the members of Made NYC and NYC, not necessarily overall manufacturing, although it's a pretty close reflection, right? Maybe if we just switched fashion and food, that would probably be about the place
right.
that we're in terms of number of jobs in New York.
Yeah, and probably same with distribution, if you switched Manhattan, Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had another question.
No, this is right. I'm sorry, geographically, but you're right about like the nature of production.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have seen Made in NYC labeling on things. I'm sure they've also seen Made in New York.
Yes.
Labeling on things.
Yeah. What's the difference?
Can you clarify the difference for people?
Yeah. So Made in New York is the city's program, and it's particularly focused on the film industry and somewhat on fashion, but it would not include, woodworking or food. And it too is a branding effort to sort of capitalize and build support for production in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to make this point earlier about high value add and being a piece of the creative economy. These are just kind of illustrations of it. And it's funny, and this becomes a problem later when we talk about C19, these are overwhelmingly small shops. I think average production size of a made in NYC manufacturer is around 5, and maybe $1 million in sales. And what that does, the reason why that's a good thing is the versatility and the ability of people just to create things really, really quickly and to cross over and to capitalize on new markets and trends and whatever they're seeing. The downside is it's hard to get to scale. And that's the challenge today in responding to COVID-19. You don't necessarily want 100 small scale producers trying to do masks. You want one great big producer doing a mask or a gown. So it presents a real logistical challenge. In the past, it was a real strength of the city's economy that you had so many small firms that could make something, stop making it, regroup, work with others, and make something else. Moving forward, I'm just, in terms of response with C19, I'm not sure it's an advantage.
Mm-hmm. And that's also not necessarily a new development. That's been the case for decades, right? That we've been a really diverse and small scale manufacturing has really dominated New York City. We've never been sort of a one company town in terms of manufacturing.
Let's go to the next. So what is it Made in NYC does? So you saw some of the posters earlier, like you'd see on a subway or a bus stop shelter. And perhaps you see pieces in media on Made in NYC and the companies. But really what's happened over the years is a transition to helping companies to tell their own stories, right? And what we've done is work with all these companies individually to begin to develop social media, websites, new strategies, new marketing campaigns, logos. We do something called pop-up photo shoots. Let's go to the next one, the next slide. So this is a pop-up photo shoot. And what we did is we went to a factory. We set up basically a film studio, and we brought in faculty and students from Pratt Institute. And in the course of a day, they can help 20-odd companies develop photography for their products. And two things to recognize here. The reason why that's so important was that as companies have become smaller, they have less and less capacity to market their product. In some ways, the internet is like this great big equalizer. It's this great vehicle for small companies to get their product out, but it's still got to look good. And that becomes a real challenge. And they have to know how to talk about it. They have to know how to tell their story. They have to know how to use social media to develop their following. The second point is, I think it was really kind of a gap in the economic development toolbox. What did cities and states do to help companies? Well, they gave them tax credits or tax benefits, or they gave them loans in general. And those are all great for making a company more competitive in the sense of lowering its costs, helping it to buy new equipment or do training for the workers. Doesn't really help sales. And what drives a lot of company decision-making, particularly about location, is the ability to sell and to increase sales. So we focused on that piece, that missing piece of the puzzle. The other feature I'll just mention here is these are students. And there's one faculty member working with 3 or 4 students in the pop-up photo studios, but we've really tried to use faculty and students both to keep our costs down and to expose more people to the sector and bring people with creative energy into the sector. Let's go to the next. A final sort of takeaway from Made in NYC in general is we've really tried to focus on minority and women-owned companies. And about 1.5 years ago, we began keeping data on the demographics of the entrepreneurs, of the owners of the company. And 70% were either minority or women-owned businesses. I think that breaks down to roughly 6% were women, 60% were women-owned, and 35% were people of color, entrepreneurs of color. And those are really high percentages for economic development programming anywhere in the country. And I think what's happened, and I think why this is the case, is our programming is really accessible. It's free. Three, once you become known in a network, you get kind of a buzz, and that's what we've tried to do. It's a very networked sector. People know other people, and that's helped us build our community within the manufacturing sector.
Mm-hmm. And I want to just give a shout out to Momo Dressing there. They're a company based in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. They make great Japanese style salad dressings and dips and stuff.
And if you look at that picture, look what they're wearing. And was always the case. And we actually have life-size photos of them. And it's a little scary seeing them in your office. Let's go on. So how have we responded to C-19? There's really been 3 buckets of work here. The first is on crisis management and just helping companies apply for whatever assistance is out there. There's a citywide working group, and we've become the repository for information about all the assistance programming. And it's sort of like we're the connector. There's this hub and spoke model. Second is the supply chain work, which is probably what most people have heard about or focused on. Again, what's going on in the Navy Yard, connecting buyers to manufacturers and manufacturers to suppliers. So that means finding the materials and the companies that can produce the masks, that can produce the gowns, and hopefully soon that can produce the ventilators. One of the companies in the Navy Yard that's doing the masks, they sourced their plastic, these are the plastic face shields in Long Island City. They sourced their fabric in the garment center, for doing the bands, the stretchy bands, and they sourced their the foam cushion between the plastic and the skin at another firm in Sunset Park. And it says something about the ecosystem that still survives here in New York City, how you have all these small firms, and if you can find the right one, you can build virtually anything that you need.
Mm-hmm. And that's such an amazing story, because it went from, basically a napkin sketch to producing about 20,000 a day in about 4 days.
Right. Pretty amazing. They believe that they're going to be able to produce 120,000 a week, which is pretty close to what the Health and Hospitals Corporation needs in the city. Mm-hmm. And the final piece I'll just say of what we're up to is this sense of building community. And when I started this business, I don't think I really understood what community meant in many ways, or why that was an important feature. And when I got to know a lot of the manufacturers, what I discovered is, they're working in isolation, which is really hard. That is stressful in itself. They have questions that they don't know who to ask. They are preoccupied with getting product out every single day. That's their must do in making sales. It's hard to get your head up. And also just being an entrepreneur in general is hard. Almost by definition, an entrepreneur is somebody who sees things a little bit differently, and they're willing to take a risk. And that is not something that our culture has rewarded in a long period of time. People who see things differently and people who are willing to take risks and do it on a small scale. These are not wealthy people. They've put their savings into this. And so by building community, we can sort of validate their feelings. We can help them break out of that sense of isolation and hopefully reduce the anxiety and give them a reason to keep creating jobs in New York City.
And speaking of anxiety, I just want to mention something that we've been dealing with. And if anybody out there has a small business, we probably had a very stressful day yesterday when the Paycheck Protection Program, quote unquote, went live. But there were a lot of downed websites and trying to get in touch with banks and everything. So it was a little bit of a mess, but I'm basically, I'm sure 90% of the small business owners in America yesterday were stressed out dealing with that, trying to get, that money to help them retain their staff so that they can come out the other end of this. So yeah, it's nice to talk to other people, which is what Cindy and I were doing yesterday, to see that we're not crazy, that other people are going through the same thing as well.
Exactly. So looking forward, I don't know that I have any particular insight or expertise in predicting the future. Here's what I sense is going on. People keep asking, is this the new normal? And I don't think there is a new normal. I think, or to the extent there is, it's about unpredictability, and that is because of the convergence of numerous large-scale trends. First of all, there's this health crisis today. I'm sure there will be more, so there's that big piece of unpredictability. Second is, of course, climate change. I didn't show you a citywide map of the industrial sectors, but virtually all the large solid industrial areas are on the waterfront. New York City's food hubs, its food distribution hubs, are all on the waterfront. Hunts Point being the biggest is just a few feet above sea level. The third factor is, of course, terrorism. We are still a target. And the fourth factor, I have no idea. I don't know. There may be other risks out there which we're just not yet aware of. So
the unknown unknowns.
Right, the unknown unknowns. So given those mega forces, what are we to do? One obvious answer has been stockpiling. Doesn't seem like that's working out. Let's assume we had a more competent administration to manage the stockpiles. The challenge would then be just the scale, first of all. And second, we don't know what we don't know. What do we need to stockpile? There are many things which are obvious, but there are many things which are not obvious. So having that ability to respond, a stockpile strategy may not be enough. And they have to be in proximity to the city. Again, their siting may make them vulnerable. So what do you do in an unpredictable situation? I think the answer is maintaining diversity. Maintaining diversity of your economic base, maintaining diversity of your land use, maintaining diversity of the skill sets and the workforce. So two critical elements in that are preserving industrial space, which goes back to the original discussion about gentrification and the density in New York. Industrial space, almost by definition, is where your infrastructure is. So we need space to maintain the basic functionality of a city. And then the last piece of this is strengthen the ability of local groups to respond. The reason why they were able to respond so quickly in the Navy Yard is they had this social infrastructure to support them. The Navy Yard is a 300 plus acre city-owned industrial park managed by a corporation, a nonprofit corporation. I'm a board member of that entity. That mission is to support the manufacturing sector and to help them grow. They have very, very deep relationships with their tenants, and having those deep relationships allowed them to facilitate putting the teams together so that in aggregation, those manufacturers could produce what was needed. That social infrastructure, that soft infrastructure, doesn't exist everywhere in the city. There's a lesser form or a lower form of it in the private industrial parks, where all the land is privately owned, and we have the local economic development organizations. They are just chronically underfunded. And they don't have the type of intimacy that I think is available through the Navy Yard, through that stability that's created at the Navy Yard. And I think moving forward, we'll have to figure out ways to strengthen that social infrastructure so that manufacturing sector can respond.
Yeah, and I should just add that the New York City Economic Development Corporation has also, played a role in building on that momentum that started at the Navy Yard and connecting some of the other businesses that are connected to the EDC, whether they're on in EDC programs or on EDC properties. So, but we have a question here. Sure. Ronnie, I don't know if you know the answer to that question, but I think it raises an important point. So Ronnie asked, would it be possible to convert vacuum cleaner bags to face masks? So,
I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I have heard that people are looking at that now.
But it highlights an important point, which is that for a lot of these really technical things that require a lot of certification in the medical field, manufacturing them is not something you can just spin up overnight, right? It's a very, very sophisticated process. Even making things like the N95 masks, once that capacity is gone, you can't just bring it back right away.
Right. But that goes back to the earlier discussion of having so many small companies. Mm-hmm. One of the things we've, I think, recognized is they cannot do medical grade equipment, PPE. But there's a lot of other equipment needed. Think of all the food service workers and all the people who are doing the deliveries for FedEx and UPS. And just, I want to say at this point, everyone is a hero. We should recognize that everyone in pieces of our economy, which we didn't even think about before, is really stepping up. They need to be protected too. And it doesn't have to be medical grade, but they need to be protected too. And I think that's where a lot of New York City manufacturing can be effective as well.
Yeah, and so that's why the face shields were such a great innovative solution, because it didn't need to be something that had to be super high level certified, but it helps extend the life of that really scarce equipment and protect people. Great. Yeah, so if anybody has any other questions for Adam, feel free. What do you see as kind of the long-term impacts? I mean, I know it's still relatively early on in this crisis, but what concerns you in terms of what are companies doing that say aren't producing PPE, but they've had to shut down? How are they going to come out the other side of this and continue to produce in
Right. So the question, it's really a political answer to that. It's how funding is distributed. And there's kind of this debate going on whether it's overwhelmingly through the companies or it's to the individuals. And I think where I come down on that is to the individuals. And the reason for that is to ensure that there's demand. When we come out of this and we need people to get back to work, to put them to work, manufacturers, anyone has to be able to sell. And to sell, they need buyers. And so it's just critical for our economy to put that cash into the hands of as many people as possible. And then there is going to be a big shakeout. No question that a lot of these companies are going to fail. They're not coming back. But I think there is still the opportunity to launch new manufacturing firms in New York City. I didn't have any data on this, but about births and deaths of firms. And not only are the made in NYC companies small businesses, they're new businesses. I mean, of course, we have some that are 50, 80, 100 years old, but the vast, vast, vast majority are under 10 and under 5 years old. So it's just interesting, even though the perception, the image of the sector may not be so strong, people continue to do it. People are going into business all the time. And I think there will be a new sort of surge of entrepreneurs who want to do something different.
And so that leads me into another question that we got, which is we've seen the effects of global outsourcing, which has exposed the weaknesses within manufacturing. Can we see a return of manufacturing of critical items back to New York, or are we really just kind of like staunching the bleeding?
No, it's. I think there will be some return, and I think if I was a large scale manufacturer or a large scale buyer, I would hedge my bets. I might produce 60, 70, 80% abroad, but I would do 20% locally. And that's a risk management strategy, which goes back to the whole discussion about diversity and unpredictability. So I think there will be some reshoring, but look, it's never going to be reshoring that is not cost effective. And there's a whole lot of elements that go into cost and risk management and, how far out you can commit your supply chains. That's why I think there will be people who will build in redundancy into their supply chain. So they'll do some overseas and they're likely to do more locally.
Well, Adam, I just want to thank you so much. We're just about out of time. Oh, sorry, we just had another question come in from Brian, who's out in California. He said, I'm seeing 3D printing as a piece of manufacturing prototypes in high value and high cost locations. How has that industry grown in New York City?
By leaps and bounds. That's right. And it's being used in a whole variety of ways, both into producing the good itself or a component in a larger scale production, or it's being used like to replace tool and die manufacturing. Rather than in the old days, somebody would make something and they make a mold out of it, and then, that would go into be cast in metal. Now they're printing it. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a big shift around that.
We know a lot of,
even, I just want to say, traditional manufacturers now are doing 3D printing for at least that component of what they do.
Sure. Yeah, it's really become integrated into the fabric of so many companies, all digital fabrication. Even our very first slide we looked at with Scott Jordan Furniture, he really revolutionized his company 20 years ago when he bought a CNC machine. So he's still making this really beautiful, handmade furniture, but he's cutting out the parts with the CNC machine so that he's able to really shrink his footprint. So he can basically make all the furniture on demand. So you see that even in things you think of as super, high-end artisanal, handcrafted items, there's often a digital element of that.
Right.
The other thing I want to add too is that we know a lot of people that work in 3D printing. We're hoping to have someone on this program, but most of the people that we know, they're working right now trying to see what they can do, whether it's making components for PPE or actually making disposable components for ventilators and other spare parts. So we're really mobilizing a lot of even the small 3D printing studios in New York City are doing what they can to help out too. So it's another big player in this crisis. Great. Well, as I was saying before, Adam, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you want to add, or tell people where they can connect with, find out more about Made in NYC and the initiatives?
Made in NYC, guys. Everyone go to madeinnyc.org. We do, there's products you can buy right there, or I'll link it through to the company's websites. We do, holiday campaigns. Now would be a great time to support New York or local companies in general. So we'd love to see you there.
Yeah. The holiday markets are so great. It's a place, see, all of these companies coming together and then to see the great diversity of what they.
Yeah. And you could also go to the Pratt Center website, Pratt Center for Community Development, to look at some of the reports we've done on manufacturing and some of the strategies, particularly the land use strategies, to maintain the functionality of the city. Do I have like 1 minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so over the past decade, the city has rezoned a lot of areas where there were concentrations of the auto repair industry. In Willets Point, on Atlantic Avenue, in Jerome Avenue. And Jerome Avenue, I guess, was about 2 years ago in the Bronx. And it just occasioned for us the thought, what does a city of 9 million people need to maintain its functionality? How much rezoning can we have? And as far as I know, none of that has really been answered. It's not like we're great supporters of, private automobiles or individual autos, but you got to have some of it. And
we don't even have any gas stations now.
South of gas stations.
42nd Street.
Yeah. So it just raises the question of what does the city need to do in good times and bad, more obvious in bad times, but to maintain its basic operational integrity and safety. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, Adam, thank you so much. So
thank you. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, I have too. And thanks to everyone for your really great questions. So again, Amanda just dropped into the chat the links for those different initiatives, Made in NYC, or you can go straight to the Pratt Center for Community Development website. And if you want to learn more about manufacturing, stay tuned to this channel. We're going to be doing a lot more programs about manufacturing, and join us for a tour in person. Come and meet some of these great people as part of our Inside Industry Tour series at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. But Adam, thank you so much for the work that you do. You've been such an incredibly tireless advocate for, you know, which I think is really an issue of economic justice. It's so important to maintain these quality jobs, and now we're understanding as well that it's also an issue of national security, that we maintain this capacity and these skills, you know, at the local level as well. So thank you so much for all the work.
Thank you.
Stay safe, and we'll hopefully see you in person very soon.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks,
Andrew,
everybody.
And Cindy and Amanda. Bye.
So before we cut away entirely, I just wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us. And again, big thanks to Adam and all the folks over at the Pratt Center. Coming up, we have more programs talking about manufacturing and food, two big topics we talked about today. So tomorrow, if you want to join a little bit of the history of manufacturing, we're going to talk about the shift over of war to wartime production during World War II at the Navy Yard and the areas around the Navy Yard. And then in the afternoon, we're going to make some chocolate with a New York City manufacturer, Ronnie Sue's Chocolates on the Lower East Side. Then on Monday, we are going to shift gears a little bit. If you have kids, or if you like to draw, or you've always wanted to draw, we're going to do a great program with another New York's Brooklyn Navy Yard based artist, Nick Golbiewski, who's going to teach us how to do his quick draw techniques of things around your apartment, or you can see right outside. We're going to be doing part 2 of our series about the history of New York City's public markets, looking at the period from World War II to the present, how the markets have been transformed, but also look at the city's larger food distribution system. We are also going to be talking to metal artist and welder, Michelle Green, who's been in the Navy Yard now for about 30 years. She's going to be talking about her work and her projects. And then we're also going to be doing a program about Greenwood Cemetery later in the week. We're going to be doing a program about intermodal shipping. And then we, on a week from today, on the 11th, we're going to do a program about the Brooklyn Army Terminal, but actually about a place called Biobat Art Space, which is the first gallery in New York City dedicated to art inspired by science. And so remember, these programs are every day at 11 a.m. So please join us. Again, if you're joining us for the first time, thank you so much. If you're joining us, this is a free program. We're doing free programs once or twice a week, but we also have paid programs, and you can sign up for our all access membership. And you can also watch recordings of all of our shows as well. So thanks everybody so much. Hope everybody has a great weekend. And if you have any other questions, you want to follow up with us, please feel free to reach out to us on social media at Turnstile Tours, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Or you can visit our website as well. So thanks everybody, and have a great day.